Welcome back to Just Chattin', and this is the series of videos we do on Thursday and Sunday evenings just for our own amusement. So, this video is a slightly different format to what you're used to because I had a rather significant computer mishap today, and although I will be able to fix it, there's no question about that, I simply will probably not be able to fix it in time to get this video posted for its usual Sunday night slot. So we are going to see if I can do this all half-an-hour video, one shot, no edits. So that's no cuts, that's no insertion of pictures, it's just what goes on this section of film, start to finish. This is what you're going to get. So we'll see if I can do it. And if I can't, well, I beg your indulgence because, in fact, I don't have a choice. It's this or we don't get a video. So let's start dealing with what we are going to talk about today. And that is Robert Jobson's book on King Charles and the interesting little tidbits that have come out from this book. So here's the thing. We all know when anybody puts out a book on anyone in the royal family, what happens these days is the media throws out a few little tidbits. Usually it's the juiciest stuff. And that's supposed to be encouraging people to go out, buy copies of the book, read it, just let's see if we can't market this book. And this has happened with every book that's come out about the royal family, oh gosh, well, ever since. So it shouldn't be any surprise that these interesting little tidbits are coming out. However, I do want to say what does surprise me in this is that most of the little tidbits coming out are about Nutmeg and the ginger sock puppet. And that kind of tells you what people are looking for, where they are looking for the beans to be spilled. Who are we spilling the beans on? We're spilling it on Nutmeg and her sock puppet. Oh, yay, I'll read that book. So we also have to be mindful that when these little bits and snippets come out, they're coming out with very little context. Now, for those of us who have been following the whole Meghan saga, and I am the first to admit I have not been following it from the beginning. I followed it retroactively. I was not aware of most of the nonsense going on with Nutmeg and her sock puppet until you folks told me about it, and so then I had to backtrack and dig out contemporary articles, sort of get my experience secondhand as almost as a historian, if you can say that, 6 or 8 months after the fact is really history. Regardless, that is how I have my perspective arranged, not necessarily what was happening at the time, because I had very little interest in them at the time, but after the fact, when all of our viewers were saying, "But Sue, didn't you notice this? What about that?" It's like, oh, okay, I will take a second look. So we're going to start in something resembling chronological order. And we're starting with 2016. Now, this is also the fall of 2016. If you'll recall, we've had some really crazy back and forth about how exactly Nutmeg and Ginger met, when exactly Nutmeg and Ginger met. So were they set up on a blind date? Did they first meet at Soho House, as Harry said in Spare. Remember, that was Harry's version of how they met, in Spare. Or did we end up with this internet romance because of an Instagram account? Initially, of course, they had said it was a blind date fixed up by a friend. The truth is, it's very likely that the only two people who really know are Nutmeg and Ginger. And do we really expect we're ever going to hear the truth from them? But one thing we can be fairly comfortable with is that 2016 was reasonably early in their relationship. And this is when Harry released a statement. And of course, Jobson mentions this in his book. Now, keep in mind, other people have mentioned it too. This was brought up in Tom Bower's book, Revenge, as well. This statement that Harry issued, basically telling the press to leave his girlfriend alone. Apparently, Charles thought this was inappropriate, and William thought it was an overreaction. And as we see it presented by Jobson, this was a red flag for everybody around Harry at the time. And certainly it seems that the staff took it as a red flag. And there are many reasons for that. The British royal family didn't ordinarily caution the press to back off anybody, and certainly didn't use a press warning to announce a coupling. That's generally not how they did it. For Nutmeg, however, this was a really important step in her acquisition of princesshood. For her, it was, one, a public declaration of the relationship. When Harry went out and said, "Don't mess with my girlfriend," he was also saying, "Look, Nutmeg is my girlfriend. Don't mess with her." It was tantamount to announcing an engagement. And quite frankly, at a time when an engagement actually had some force and meaning, a statement like that probably would have been considered to have been an engagement. It also furthered her victim narrative. Now, I believe at the time, and this is 2016, I believe at the time, she only wanted Harry to perceive her as a victim. I mean, if other people did, great, but he was her primary target for this victim narrative, that he was the one who had to see her as a victim so that he would protect her. It was part of her link to Diana, but certainly she needed him to take a protective interest in her that would bond him to her, that would further solidify the relationship. So we had that, but it also, and this is like number 3 on my list, it served as a warning to the press to handle her with care. White gloves when you're dealing with this one. If he was upset this early on, when in fact, although I do believe there were racist comments made in the media, I do not necessarily believe all of them were made by journalists, by official media outlets. I think a lot of the stuff that was declared to be racist, and probably was racist, I'm not disputing that, were comments from the average citizenry of the world, whoever had access to the internet and was making posts on social media or in response to the stories carried by online newspapers. So, yeah, I believe some things were, in fact, racist. Was it significant enough to be called out in this way? No. Because the fact is, when you're a public figure, it doesn't matter what color you are. You can be green, you can be purple. And somebody is still going to find a way to throw color into the equation, and they are going to say bad things about you from time to time. That's just, the old expression, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. This is where it comes from. And I think number 4, the final benefit of that statement was that it created for the public, but strengthened in Harry's mind the link between Nutmeg and Diana, which we all know it was completely imaginary on Harry's part. He saw her as, like the second coming of his mother. And of course, this statement in which he referenced his mother, well, I believe it was oblique, but still referenced his mother's situation, didn't want Nutmeg to be plagued by the press, by the media. They had already taken one of the women in his life, woe is me. And that link to Diana was important for Nutmeg, not just for Harry, but at this point, her tentacles were stretching out into the community a little too. So, because of that, I do not think it was simply Nutmeg pushing Harry for this statement. I think it was Sunshine Sachs or someone else from her PR team, but I do believe it was Sunshine Sachs at the time, on her PR team pushing her to push him, because this is a little too clever for her. It was a little too valuable a stroke for her to simply have thought this up on her own. I believe that when I look at something like that, I see the hand of a major PR firm in the background pushing for this statement in order to further her interests on so many levels. And in fact, it did. So that's what I find really interesting about this, that we should never overlook the good that did for Nutmeg in solidifying her position with Harry. And we shouldn't overlook the fact that even this early on, it was starting to look like the red flags were going up in other people's minds. So, next up, and this is again chronological, Harry was apparently furious when Charles said he wouldn't be able to support Nutmeg. He couldn't afford to, as he was already supporting Camilla, William, Catherine, their children. And that's interesting because I remember the rumors circulating at the time. Now, I do not remember them contemporaneously. I remember researching the contemporary articles at the time. I was doing it some 6 months later. And the rumors were that the Queen had told Nutmeg that there was no objection from Buckingham Palace if Nutmeg wanted to continue acting after she was married. And then this was flipped on its side. To say that Nutmeg should work or must work, that she must be self-supporting, which initially is not the way it was presented. I frankly thought that was an incredible concession on the part of the Queen, just given Nutmeg's body of dramatic work up to that point. Most of it consisted of showing off her body in any possible way she could. This was stuff that was pretty explicit. I wouldn't go so far as to say it was hardcore pornography, but it was about as explicit as one can get on regular network television at that time. And that Buckingham Palace would have said, yeah, you can continue to do that. That's That's a serious concession. That's one of those things that leads me to believe the Queen probably had not seen most of Nutmeg's acting credits. Because, I'm just not seeing the Queen going along with that if she had. This is one of those stories that I think there is a larger backstory that we're not hearing. Did Charles go up to Harry and say, I can't afford to support your wife? And then what? Did he say, she'll have to work and support herself? You don't get to marry her? Camilla doesn't get her horses or whatever it is that Camilla's into? I just have a lot of trouble with this one because I expect that whatever this little bombshell was is not what is being presented at this time. So I would say that's one, if I were you, I would take it with a grain of salt until we get further clarification, which in fact we may not get. All right, next up, again chronologically, the so-called Sandringham Summit. That is that's something that took place in January of 2020 when Nutmeg and Ginger had run away to Canada and were in the process of sort of stepping down from their roles as working royals. I know they prefer the term stepping back. I don't. I say it was stepping down. There was no back. Back suggests you could go forward, but stepping down, yeah, I think that's where we're at, because I don't think they can return to that role anytime soon. So, as Jobson relates it, the Queen had the room swept for listening devices, for bugs. She had people in to make sure no one was recording this. She refused to allow Nutmeg to attend the meeting electronically via remote, which would have been Zoom or Skype or whatever they were going to do. Frankly, they're the royal family. They could have set up cameras and bounced it off a satellite. Who knows what they had in mind? But Nutmeg would not be participating via long distance. The family was apparently pretty plain about their concerns that if Nutmeg was participating, they would not have any guarantee the meeting would not be recorded or that there would be no unauthorized bystanders there in the background with Nutmeg. Now, this speaks volumes for how little the family trusted her. And keep in mind, this was just January 2020. She had only been in the family for like 18 months at that point. Still, no trust, zero trust. And this is before the Oprah interview. So certainly what we're looking at in this particular time context is the relationship had obviously broken down much more than anyone realized at the time. They were virtually accusing her of photographing and recording for the press, even as early as 2020, the beginning of 2020. So for me, that was like a real jump out at you. Wow. And the Queen was the one who was very concerned about this as well. So this is something that wasn't just Charles and William, but the whole family was aware that it was a possibility, and the whole family was taking this very seriously. Ouch. So this next one, and this is 4 on my list, is sort of an ongoing thing. This starts early and moves really until the end of the Queen's life, because this is the running thoughts that the Queen was expressing to people. And I've gathered them all here in this one collection so that we can look at it all together. Apparently, at times, she thought that Nutmeg and Ginger were quite mad. And now that's a quote, quite mad. I don't think she meant that literally. I believe that was simply the way you or I would say, I think they're quite mad. In other words, they're asking for too much, they're out of control, their statements are unrealistic, etc. Not to say that she actually believed they were out of their minds and needed to be confined to a psychiatric facility. So I want to be really clear about that. She would say to people that she felt that Harry was so consumed by his attachment to Nutmeg that it was clouding his judgment, which is a very interesting statement. And it seems very clear that what she was expressing was that there was a sense the Queen was conveying that she did not feel this was a normal and healthy relationship. I think that's what comes across to me. That certainly she was glad that Harry found love, at least that's what she had said to Nutmeg, but it was definitely a relationship that the family was very concerned about, apparently almost from the very beginning and right up, at least until the end of the Queen's life. She was troubled by Harry's conversations with her after he went to Montecito, in which he was asking her to intercede on his behalf, on Harry's behalf, with Charles. Go to my dad and tell him he needs to do these things for me. Not sure what he was asking her for, but clearly that the Queen take Harry's part and go to Charles on Harry's behalf. Obviously, the Queen was troubled by that. It is very unlikely that she did it. This was a woman who had, it's a woman who had 70 years on the throne and was certainly asked many, many times in the course of her very long life and reign if she would do a favor for this one or that one, etc. And she knew how to walk away from those things. And quite frankly, anyone in her position, even someone less politically adept than the late Queen, would have known how to blow that off. She in the early stages of Harry's relationship with Nutmeg, she had a one-on-one conversation with Nutmeg in which she tried to sort of shepherd Nutmeg into the family by suggesting that she go to Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, now the Duchess of Edinburgh, for support within the family, for mentoring, basically. And Nutmeg's response was, I've got Harry. Apparently meaning she did not need anyone else in the family. It's interesting, though, because this is a typical type of response one expects from a woman who marries her way into success. It's like, what does she need with anyone else? Once she has glommed on to the marriage partner, in this case, the prince, glommed on, They don't need anything else. That's what they want. That's the goal. The rest of the family doesn't matter. And this certainly shows that very early on, Nutmeg had virtually no commitment to the family part of the royal family. She did not want to become close to other family members. No. And why would she want anything to do with Sophie anyway? Nutmeg was apparently hurt and offended that Catherine was cold to her. But Catherine's going to be queen, so Nutmeg would have tried to suck up to Catherine. Sophie, nah. Sophie was Countess of Wessex at the time and is now Duchess of Edinburgh, and that's probably as far as she's going to go in the hierarchy of the British royal family, so why would Nutmeg need anything from her? It's very interesting, and it's rather unfortunate that no one started to put those pieces together to realize that she was only love bombing the people who were higher up than she was. Certainly she was not going to waste her time on a countess. She was going to be a duchess, so... And that should have been a red flag. If it wasn't, it should have been. And finally, this one I think will come as no surprise to anyone, although I have to say, Catherine is a much better actress than Nutmeg. In the walkabout that William and Catherine did with Nutmeg and Ginger following the Queen's death to greet the crowds and accept condolences, Catherine apparently described that as one of the hardest things she has ever had to do. She had to play nice with people who were publicly shredding her family at every turn. And that wasn't easy for her. However, she did seem to be very comfortable. She was very gracious. She did seem a little remote to me, but I did not, and believe me, I looked at photographs, I watched the video of this little walkabout. I did not see anything that indicated anything more unusual from Catherine than simply that she was somewhat withdrawn, which one would expect. She had known the Queen for many years, and she had been close to the Queen. The Queen was her husband's grandmother, the great-grandmother of her children, etc., etc. One would expect that she would be a little remote, a little distant. She was out there putting a brave face on it, but she too was grieving. Nutmeg, on the other hand, was rather visibly uncomfortable with the whole thing. Nutmeg was clinging on to the sock puppet as if he were her life raft in a storm, and she was the one who seemed the most ill at ease. Catherine, who has said this was incredibly difficult, pulled it off like a real trooper. So I think that's a great testimony to Catherine's ability to take on the role she will one day take on. Now she's Princess of Wales. One day she will be Queen. And I think she will be able to acquit it well, because we have certainly seen that when she is undertaking one of the most difficult things she has ever had to do, you just couldn't see it on her face. So I thought that was very interesting. And I think, in summation, let me just say that these tidbits that are coming out of the Jobson book are telling me that there were red flags all over the place. There is no question but that the staff would have been deeply concerned about Nutmeg's entry into the royal family, and that anyone intimately involved in that transition would have been worried about what was down the road in terms of the future. Things were bad from the beginning. And when Nutmeg and Ginger say that they were not protected by the institution, the firm, Buckingham Palace, the royal family, whoever they want to blame for this, they are full of baloney. Because if, in fact, anyone had wanted to throw them to the wolves, Nutmeg in particular, remember she was fed to the wolves, they had all of the opportunities to do it, and they did not. They were, in fact, picking up the pieces to keep all of these tidbits away from the public for 5 years. So, I have to say, they are entitled to kudos for that. The royal family, that is, not Nutmeg and Ginger. Nutmeg and Ginger clearly don't have a leg to stand on when they say the palace done them wrong, because the palace clearly protected them from the ordinary fallout that this kind of behavior usually produces, and obviously should have produced at the time. Red flag central. All right, that's what I have for you all today. We are not going to do a slideshow on the way out, unfortunately. I need my editing software for that, and it's sitting over here on a dead computer. So, with any luck at all, this will all be resolved in a couple of days so that next week everything will go swimmingly as it always does. Meantime, I appreciate you being here with me. Thank you so much, and have a terrific week.